relentlessly focused on the problem of methamphetamine addiction, production, the poisoning of children that was resulting from the fact that Washington State was number 5 or number 6 in America for meth addiction, meth production, and trafficking. And we went to work on that. We used the community meth action teams that have been set up around the state in preceding years. We introduced legislation. We coordinated with law enforcement. We did a lot of outreach to the community, particularly to youth. We had a lot of success. In 2004, there were about 1,400 meth lab incidents in our state. In 2010, it was less than 50 across the entire state. Remarkable progress. Not only that, but DUIs involving meth declined by 30% in just one 12-month period. Around 2009, mortality from methamphetamines dropped. The number of cases that we see in our office involving children who have been exposed to meth production and use has declined dramatically, as compared to 2006, when in some quarters of that year, nearly every new case that came to our office involving abused and neglected kids who we were trying to get in with relatives or put into foster care, nearly every new case in offices like Kennewick and Bellingham and Port Angeles involved children whose parents were meth users. An amazing turnaround in a relatively short number of years because of the intense community-wide focus that brought together a wide array of stakeholders and involved the community in general. And it was about in 2007 when I saw a statistic that really grabbed my attention and resulted in my expanding the focus from meth to include prescription drug abuse and accidental overdoses. And that was the statistic that showed us that nearly as many people in 2007 died in accidental prescription drug overdoses as died in traffic accidents. Now, that's an astounding figure for those of us who follow public safety and public health, because traditionally we viewed traffic accidents as being, far and away the number one accidental cause of death in our state. And we've made a lot of progress in reducing it over time. And as a country, by tackling drunk driving and by improving the safety of automobiles, by encouraging and enforcing the use of seat belts and so forth. But to see accidental prescription drug overdoses come in and since then actually surpass the number of accident fatalities was really quite striking. And this is a trend that we've seen across the country. From 1999 through 2006, the number of poisoning deaths in the United States from accidental prescription drug overdoses nearly doubled. In 7 years, nearly doubled. From 20,000 accidental deaths to 37,000 in a year. And we're seeing that mirrored in our state as well. And unfortunately, as with meth back in the bad old days, we are one of the leading states in America in the number of accidental prescription drug overdoses resulting in death on a per capita basis. Prescription drugs are now also the second most abused drug by youth. And they've overtaken other hard drugs among youth. Is still second to marijuana and alcohol. But among kids, this is a huge problem. Let me tell you a couple of stories to illustrate this. When we were working on the meth problem with Operation Allied Against Meth, 2006 to the end of 2008, we went out and visited a lot of schools. I personally visited and spoke at about 65 schools across the state talking about meth. We had a young woman who traveled with us who was a recovering meth addict, who really turned her life around. And we had a lot of impact on the kids we talked to. And you show pictures to kids of meth users, it scares them. You show them the a brain scan of a meth user, it gets their attention. But when we started going out in 2008 and 2009 and talking about prescription drugs, it was much harder. Now think about why this might be the case. Meth is scary. The meth users look scary, the drug is scary, it's made with all kinds of nasty chemicals. Meth is scary. Kids have enough sense to stay away from it, even if it's just for vanity's purpose. They don't want to look like a meth user. Prescription drugs are not scary. They come in those neat little orange bottles. They've been prescribed. They're legal in the first instance. People take pills all the time. We're sort of a pill-popping culture. You take a pill. If you got a problem, take a pill. You got a vanity issue, take a pill. That's our culture. And kids are raised with meds, right? They're used to having them around. They're not afraid of them. They don't understand that a little pill can be very dangerous, especially when combined with other little pills. You know what a farming party is? It's where the kids get together. Everyone brings, instead of a bottle of wine, a bottle of booze, you bring a bottle of pills. Put them in a bowl, mix them up, start randomly taking them. It's astounding that anyone would play this kind of, prescription Russian roulette, but it's exactly what has happened around the country. Let me give you a data point. At the peak of the meth epidemic in our state, the Healthy Youth surveys conducted by the Superintendent of Public Instruction in the school districts indicated that about 2% of high school students and younger had tried meth. About 20% of high school youth and middle school youth say they've abused prescription drugs. About 12% said they'd abused them in the last 30 days. That's 12% of the high school seniors, about 10% of the sophomores, even a percentage of the 8th graders. Clearly, this is a problem on a different scale for youth and for our culture and our society as a whole than we've ever seen before, certainly than we saw with meth. So it calls for a different response, a different strategy, and a really intense focus. Now, one of the responses that came was the response of the Washington Agency Medical Director Group, led by Dr. Gary Franklin, the L&I Medical Director. I don't know if Dr. Franklin is here today or not, but he has done some good work on this issue. In 2007, the Agency Medical Director Group, or AMDG, adopted dosing guidelines as an educational pilot to help address the overdose epidemic. These guidelines recommend, among other things, that a healthcare provider prescribing opioids in excess of an average daily morphine equivalent dose, I think it's 120 milligrams MED, consult with a pain management specialist. In 2008, a Washington licensed physician filed a lawsuit in the Eastern District Court, the federal district court for the Eastern District of Washington, challenging the AMDG guidelines on several state and federal statutory and constitutional grounds. Now, in our role in the Attorney General's office as legal counsel to state agencies, we defended the Department of Labor and Industries in this case, which was challenging the new guidelines. Senior counsel Melissa Burke-Kane led a team of attorneys who prevailed on a summary judgment motion in that case. Later on, the Ninth Circuit upheld the dismissal of the case in a 2010 ruling, which confirmed that the guidelines were merely advisory and did not have the force of law because the guidelines were not in statute or in the Washington Administrative Code. And I want to thank Senior Counsel Melissa Burke-Kane and her team for the work they've done. Assistant Attorney General Mike Tribble's here with us. You'll be hearing from him shortly. He'll tell you about how these rules get made when they are made under the Administrative Procedures Act. Fast forward to the 2010 legislative session. Representative Jim Moeller introduced HB 2876 to address chronic pain management. A little background on Representative Moeller. He comes out of the Clark County area, and he's very, very interested in and focused on issues around elder care, health care for seniors, protecting seniors from abuse. And I think that's one of the ways he came to this issue. He's done a lot of work, and he's fairly thoughtful around these issues, and he became alarmed at the data he was seeing around accidental overdoses involving prescription drugs. In the original version of the bill, ESHB 2876 would have required every Washington licensed prescriber to complete training in chronic pain management, every prescriber. Follow-up draft to the bill, SHB 2876, removed the education requirement and required the prescribing boards and commissions to adopt rules based on the AMDG guidelines. So we started out with HB 2876, the original version of the bill. Every prescriber would have had to take complete training. Moved to a substitute version, SHB 2876, which removed the education requirement but required the prescribing boards and commissions to adopt rules based on the guidelines. The bill was then amended again, removing the requirement for the rules to exactly mirror the guidelines. And that draft, ESHB 2876, is the version that became law. It essentially required the prescribing boards to work collaboratively to create new dosing guidelines in consultation with the agency medical directors group, the University of Washington, and the largest professional associations for the prescribing professions. Beginning in 2010 and continuing through this year, the Medical Commission and other prescribing boards collaborated in creating model rules for treatment of chronic non-cancer pain. Each individual board and commission conducted a rule hearing and voted to adopt the model rules without any substantive changes. To date, we've received a great deal of positive feedback about the new rules. Lawmakers have been complimentary, and many physicians have expressed their support because the rules provide them tools in managing a challenging patient population. But on the other hand, we've also received negative feedback. For example, from citizens suffering from chronic pain, who have expressed fear that the rules would result in their doctors refusing to prescribe pain medications or prescribing a lot less pain medication. And they worry that their chronic non-cancer pain would be left untreated or inadequately treated. While the rules have exemptions and exceptions which should alleviate these concerns, this fear is circulating within the patient community and will have to be addressed. We've also had some healthcare providers object to this type of regulation of their practice. Finally, there have been concerns about the number of pain management specialists who are available to be consulted with and who are willing to accept referrals to review the treatment plans for those patients who are prescribed opioid medications at the required referral threshold of 120 milligrams MED daily dosage. And of course, we worry about access to pain specialists in the harder-to-reach areas of our state. I worry about it in terms of rural areas, the reservations on our state, which can be quite remote in some cases, and so forth. But it's a step forward, and notwithstanding the work that has to be done, I think it was the right thing to do, and I think overall the reaction has been positive, and I think these new guidelines will make a difference. When you talk to kids about where they get the pills that they abuse, some people think it must be on the internet. To some extent, but it's not a major source, at least for young people. They think, well, it's the pharmacy robberies. Yet truly the pharmacy robberies are sky high. We have more, in a recent year, we had more pharmacy robberies in Washington than in the entire state of Texas. So pharmacy robberies are an issue. But most young people and many other people who abuse prescription drugs get them from the medicine cabinet. Their parents, their friends' parents, their neighbors, what have you. I know you're all aware that when law enforcement or EMTs or other officials show up at a death scene, say someone has passed away at home from cancer, what's the first thing they do? They bag up all the meds. We know of many cases where those pills have simply disappeared if that doesn't happen promptly. So we know that kids are mostly getting a hold of the pills from medicine cabinets. Sometimes they share the pills. They might even sell the pills to each other. There are dealers out there. You may have seen the national advertising campaign from a couple of years ago, which contrasts the stereotype of a drug dealer with the kind of person who's distributing pills. It can be very different. I was in a middle school in Marysville, Washington, a couple of years ago. And I was given my pitch about prescription drugs and how they can be dangerous. And there are about 1,000 kids in this auditorium. And we got to the question and answer time, and a little girl raised her hand and she said, "Is it true you can get high from sniffing Altoids?" I looked at her, and I walked over closer to her, and I said, "I'm sorry, could you say that again?" I wasn't really sure I'd heard her correctly. She said, "Is it true you can get a high from sniffing Altoids?" And she kind of giggled, and her friends around her kind of laughed. And I looked into that afterwards, and it turns out that we have kind of a 21st century equivalent or analog to candy cigarettes. How many people remember candy cigarettes? Go on, admit it, right? I was in a novelty store not long ago, and they had all this, gags and novelties, and they had little reproductions of those little candy cigarette packs, just like Dad smokes. Why are the middle schoolers and the 6th graders and the 5th graders thinking about Altoids? Why are they thinking about sniffing pixie sticks? You pop off the top of a pixie stick, that little poof powder. It's because they're emulating older kids. I was talking to a group of kids, not kids, but of young men and women with the Washington Youth Academy, a program run for at-risk youth by the National Guard. Phenomenal programs over in Bremerton. And they sent their cadre down to Olympia, and I got to speak to them, and I was talking to them about prescription drugs, and this young man raised his hand. He said, "Hey, you're right about prescription drugs. This is a big problem in the schools. Many of these kids were in the program because they had problems with drugs and alcohol. But he said, you better start paying attention to the over-the-counter drugs. You better start paying attention to the fact that kids are abusing chlorocidin, I think was the drug he mentioned specifically, OTC. He said what's happening is the younger kids can get a hold of that stuff easier than the prescription stuff, and we're seeing that abuse spread. And this is, to me, the heart of the problem. It suffuses our culture, and the kids are starting out, they're playing around with Altoids or Pixie Sticks, and they're graduating to OTCs, and then, of course, the inevitable step towards prescription drugs for some of them. So we've tackled this problem at the Attorney General's office on a broad front. And I want to share with you a couple of things we're doing, because I want to stress to you that none of us who's working on this problem are trying to put it all on you as prescribers. This is not going to be solved, in my opinion, or the opinion of others who have been paying close attention, by one tactic, like revising, dosing guidelines. That is one important element, but it's one of several. So let me share some of the other things that we're doing. First of all, we've been supporting nonprofits that are out doing education work in the community around prescription drug abuse. We made a grant to a group called Prescriptions for Life. It was founded by a man over in the Spokane area whose daughter nearly died from a prescription drug overdose. We've been making other grants, all of which come from a lawsuit that we settled with the maker of OxyContin. So we're making funds available. We made a grant to the Boys and Girls Clubs to hire a tribal coordinator to work with the tribes to start to plan for and set up more Boys and Girls Clubs. There are 29 federally recognized tribes in our state, and 27 of them have reservations. Only one of them has a Boys and Girls Club. And we know the Boys and Girls Clubs are particularly effective at working with youth on prevention of substance abuse, violence, and other prevention strategies. We decided at some point, I think I was visiting school number 68 or 69 on my 3-year journey around the state to do that, and I realized I can't get to all the schools. So I came up with a new idea to bring the kids to us. So beginning in October of 2008, we've held a series of youth prevention forums, one in the fall, one in the spring, inviting about 400 youth from around our state to get together. In October, when we meet in Yakima, we've done this 3 times now, they get together and we teach them how to do outreach, how to organize. We give them examples of good work. They bring their ideas. It's fabulous. In the spring, we bring them together again, and they show us their work. And they compete with each other in a friendly competition. This year we had over 40 teams of high schoolers and some middle schoolers showing us their videos, their art, their advertising campaigns, their poetry, all of it around prevention messages. And every year the quality takes another leap forward. One group out of Shelton put together a remarkable video about texting and driving, the dangers of it. It included interviews with a couple of people who had killed other people while they were driving and texting. Just absolutely powerful. It's working. The kids are coming together. They're inspiring each other. They're learning from each other. They're learning from us. They're going back into their communities, and a big part of the messaging they're delivering is around prescription drugs. If you were there, if you could see these young people, you would be so impressed and inspired because they get it. And of course, the peer-to-peer messaging is very powerful. It will matter more when a young person hears from another young person that it can be dangerous to abuse pills than it would be to hear from us or from a public service announcement from the National Ad Council. We've also been focused on trying to make it easier for people to safely dispose of their unused medications. And so we've partnered with the Drug Enforcement Administration on their drug take-back days. There have been 2 of these. During the September 2010 event, nationwide, that one-day effort netted 121 tons of unused medicines. In our state, it was 4.5 tons in one day. It was so successful, the DEA decided they wanted to do it again. They repeated the program in April. Again, very, very successful. Another element that we've been working on, and I think is very, very important, is to establish a prescription monitoring program. We're one of only about 10 states that lacks a program that will allow you as prescribers to be notified or a dispenser to be notified when someone's running around smurfing the pharmacies. And I'm not talking about the little blue guys on TV. Smurfing is a term from the meth trade, where the meth addicts will be hired by producers to run around and buy or steal as much of the over-the-counter meds as they can, as much of the ephedrine and pseudoephedrine as they can. So now you see, and have for a long time, of course, people smurfing pharmacies, right? Whether it's a stolen prescription pad or a prescriber who's operating out the back door, whatever it is, we don't have a good system. I mean, if someone makes the mistake of going to several Rite Aids in a row, they'll know. But the pharmacy databases don't talk to each other. So 40 states have put together systems that allow and require reporting when prescriptions are filled so we can start to follow who is running around smurfing the pharmacies. And then that information can be provided to you, so you're aware you're being scammed, and to the pharmacy and to law enforcement where appropriate. In 2008, we gave a grant for $683,000 to the State Department of Health. It was money we recovered from yet another lawsuit against a drug company to create a prescription drug monitoring program. The legislature appropriated that money to the Department of Health to create a drug monitoring program to prevent the kind of doctor shopping that I'm talking about. Unfortunately, in a budget crunch, the money was used for vaccines instead of launching this or beginning to build this prescription monitoring program. Since then, however, the states received a federal grant to restart the prescription drug monitoring program, and DOH is now preparing to do so. One of the steps I took a few years ago is to form a prescription drug advisory committee to work with the Department of Health in carrying out that program, to talk about how to fund it. This is a big challenge. How are we going to pay for it? Everyone wants someone else to pay for it. Doctors don't want another $10 or $15 in their licensing fee, neither do the pharmacists. The drug companies don't want to pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to have to come up with a long-term funding strategy. It's not a lot of money. If you look at other states, we should be able to run this monitoring program for less than $1 million a year going forward. And we've got the money to get it up and running. That's paid for. So we'll have to solve that problem, and we're working with the legislature to figure out how to do that. And finally, we're taking this issue national. In 2009, in Colorado Springs, we had our summer meeting, the same meeting that's occurring in Chicago next week. And I stepped up and made a presentation on prescription drug overdosing and what we're doing in our state. And then the Attorney General of Montana stepped up, and he made the same presentation. So Attorney General Bullock and I teamed up, and we've been working collaboratively since then. We have, in every one of our meetings since June of 2009, every national meeting of the AGs, and we meet 3 times a year, we've had at least one presentation or panel discussion around prescription drug issues. Overdosing, prescription monitoring programs, safe disposal, and the like. So we're keeping the National Association of AGs focused on this. As president of that association, beginning next week, we're going to continue that focus. I'm very pleased that Dr. Kahana can come and speak about the work we're doing here in our state, because the good news is that in many respects, we're leading the country, particularly in your community of physicians, prescribers. We're ahead of the curve compared to other states. We don't have a prescription monitoring program like they do yet, but we're doing other things they're not doing. So what we're doing at our national meetings is to educate the AGs, to bring them up to speed, and to encourage them to push for these kinds of innovations in their state as well. And that's how these good ideas spread, and that's how we're going to get on top of this issue. I am confident that although prescription drugs abuse is a more pernicious problem even than meth, and perhaps a more difficult problem to tackle even than meth, that we will ultimately be successful, because we have an unusually collaborative environment in this state. We have the precedent of dealing with meth. We have the success stories. We know that community action teams work, and we're committed to doing it. And I want to thank you for your commitment, your interest in this issue. I hope that you'll be part of this effort, as I know you will be, so we can move forward and once again relegate prescription drug abuse to a historical footnote the way that we've been able to do to a large extent with meth. Thank you very, very much.